Hey there, welcome back to MetFlex and Chill. This is Rachel Gregory, your host, and today I'm here with a solo episode, and I'm answering a question that I got in my Q&A box on Instagram. Typically, I answer several questions in an episode like this, but this is a question that I get all the time, so I wanted to dive into it and kind of go down a few different rabbit holes because that's what I love to do. So the question is, can I lose weight without tracking macros? So this is a very, very common question. It's something that I've asked myself before. I get a lot of clients who ask this question, and I wanted to just address it in its entirety and kind of give you an idea of why I feel how I feel about tracking macros and all of that. So we're going to dive into all of that. Before we do, as always, if you're enjoying MetFlex and Chill, please make sure to share it out to anybody that you think would be interested in the show. Let them know about any topics that you feel have helped you in your journey, your fitness journey, your nutrition journey, anything like that. It would be super helpful to kind of spread the word about the show and get people to tune in. And also, we have a lot of exciting things coming up with the show and with MetFlex Life in general. Lots of new guests coming on, lots of new and exciting content coming out. So stay tuned for that. I will be letting you know more about that as it rolls out. And yeah, let's get into answering this question. Can I lose weight without tracking macros? All right, getting into the question today, can I lose weight without tracking macros or intuitive eating? So this is a great question, and I think you can, but I personally think that for most people, it's a lot harder than we think. And the reason I think this is because of the current food environment that we live in and the what we're exposed to on a daily basis. So there is hyper palatable food everywhere, processed food, packaged food, whatever it is, it's everywhere. And it's something that makes following our kind of intuition a lot harder because a lot of the hyperpalatable and the packaged foods are basically manufactured to make us want more and to kind of bypass some of the signals in our brain that tell us that we're full, right? So that's one big issue there. And obviously, if you aren't consuming any processed or packaged foods and you're really sticking to more of a whole foods based diet, which of course I recommend, then yes, that's going to be a lot easier. But just based off of the current environment that we're in now, it just makes it a lot harder. Also kind of thinking about, if we're going out to eat at restaurants, right? You can definitely do that, right? But think about, what you don't know, what you can't control and see is just an unknown, right? So there's lots of unknowns when you're eating out at restaurants. You don't know like how they're cooking their food specifically, even if they tell you you're not back there in the kitchen cooking the food. You don't see how much oil they're adding to things, especially with oil and things like that. That adds up very quickly calorically. So you could be, having, this is a random example, like a chicken breast on top of your salad and, think that that's a good option, it is a great option, but who knows if they cooked that, even if it was a grilled chicken breast, who knows if they marinated it in a ton of oil beforehand, and that's going to add on, extra calories and things like that. Not that that's bad or anything like that, but it's just an unknown. And again, this is just an example. Another example is just portion sizes. So like when you're going out to eat at restaurants and things like that, portion sizes are very, very big, right? So I feel like, you've probably seen those ads or those commercials looking at the portion sizes, 20 or 30 years ago versus the ones now. I think that's like a McDonald's ad or something, but you'll see that they're massive. They're much bigger than they used to be. And so that's another issue that we're facing. It's just we have these, foods and portion sizes put in front of us, and we feel like we at least for me, like I've grown up on, a portion size that's way bigger than maybe my parents grew up on, right? So it's just different, right? And it's another kind of struggle that we're facing. So with all that being said, I do think it's possible for some people to eventually lose weight and lose body fat without tracking and, eating intuitively. But I think that comes after you've gone through a period of tracking. The reason for this is because when you go through a period of tracking, you build up that skill that comes with, understanding portion sizes and being aware of them. And then also understanding like what foods contain what, right? What foods contain protein, what foods contain fats and carbs and things like that. So that's something to think about. And personally, I look at tracking macros and calories like I look at money. So you budget your money. And if you have certain financial goals that you want to reach, then you pay attention to what you're spending your money on, right? So, you don't blow it all on things like Amazon Prime Day, like I did yesterday, right? Like, so you budget that. You budget your money, and that's looked at as normal, and that's looked at as something that's good to do, right? Budgeting your money. If you have no idea what you're spending your money on, how are you going to reach any of your financial goals, right? And especially in an efficient way. You're just going to be guessing. So that's the same that goes for fat loss goals, right? So whenever someone asks me if they need to track macros to lose weight, lose body fat, or whatever it is, I always respond by saying something like, do you want to reach your fat loss goals in the most efficient and effective way possible, and also learn how to sustain those results after the diet? Or do you want to just kind of guess and hope for the best? And then typically, that the latter part of that, guessing and hoping for the best, leads to a lot of frustration, a lot of time wasted, and you kind of just continue to spin your wheels for a while. And I was there. I've done that. I've watched many clients come from that, and it's actually very, very rewarding when you can start to understand how valuable tracking your intake can be. So a few of the main reasons why I personally encourage tracking and use it within my coaching practice with clients, there's a few different reasons, and I touched on a few of them before, but I want to dive into those a little bit more in depth so you kind of get a better idea of that. So these aren't the only reasons, but they are the primary ones in my opinion, and that's why I want to expand on them. So the first reason that I recommend tracking macros for my clients, why I do it myself, the first reason is tracking creates structure, direction, and ultimately more control. So without structure and direction, like I said before, you're basically just throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping it sticks, right? Another analogy I like to think about is, if you were to wander into a forest, hoping that you would find your way without, a map or a compass, you kind of just went in and wandered around. You may eventually, find your destination, right? You may eventually get to where you want to go if you don't get completely lost, right? But it would probably take a lot less time and energy if you actually did have a map or a compass or something to guide you in the right direction, right? So a lot of us create structure in many other aspects of our lives, right? So whether it comes to our finances, like I chatted about before, whether it comes to structure within our jobs or within our household, whatever it is, we all have structure in those areas, but a lot of us fail to recognize the importance of structure within our diet, within our nutrition, right? And in our eating habits. So I tell my clients this all the time. Structure equals freedom. The more structure you have, the easier it is to know and control what direction to move in. And the more freedom you'll ultimately be able to have to move forward, right? So I'll say it again, the more structure you have, the easier it is to know and control what direction to move in. And ultimately, the more freedom you'll have to just move forward and to continue striving for your goals and to continue reaching your goals and then maintain those down the line, right? So having structure is super, super important. And that's probably the main reason why, tracking can be super, super beneficial. So tracking creates structure, direction, and ultimately control. So that would be reason number one. Reason number two is creating awareness to ensure you're getting to your goal as efficiently as possible. So if you are a client of mine, or if you've heard me talk on a podcast in the past, I always tend to bring up these words awareness and efficiency and structure and control, because these are all keys to a successful transformation. Awareness is probably the most important thing in any aspect. So when you track your food, just like you track your finances, as I mentioned before, you're becoming aware of exactly what and how much you're consuming. So you're gathering data so that when you need to make a decision or you need to make an adjustment, you have actual measurable info and data to work with, right? That just makes sense. So another example is you probably wouldn't buy a house or a car without first checking your bank account and your finances and all of that, right? So that's something like, I'm not just going to go out and buy a car and hope that I have the money in my bank account to buy that car, right? You have, you're looking back on data, you're looking back on, how things are going with your finances. So making decisions based on data is key in getting to where you want to be, and also key in keeping your results over the long term when it comes to nutrition and fat loss goals and all of that. So this is also important because it helps to separate the subjective from the objective data. So as many of you know, and as I talk about a lot on this podcast, there's a huge mental game that goes along with fat loss. It's not just, numbers and data and scale weight and things like that. There's a huge mental aspect of it. So the more objective data we have, right, the more objective data we have in terms of what we're consuming on a daily basis, what we're maybe entering into MyFitnessPal. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect, but it's still data, right? The more objective data we have, the more accurate adjustments we can make to keep things moving along, at the desired rate and in the desired direction. So I'm sure you've heard the saying, what gets measured gets managed. That is something that I believe in wholeheartedly. I think that I talked about this in the last podcast. I believe that I'm a huge data nerd. When I was talking about the 7 reasons why the scale fluctuates and why you shouldn't be paying attention to the daily fluctuations, but you should still be tracking those daily weigh-ins, because that data over the long term is what matters. It's not the short term, but the long term. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying about what gets measured gets managed. When you measure those things, when you have that data to look back on, you can make changes accurately based off objectivity versus based off of, subjectivity or how you feel, right? Not saying that you can never make decisions based off how you feel. You absolutely can, and you should, but we definitely want to have that objective data as well, because there's some things that can get skewed if we're just relying on how we're feeling when it comes to that subjective data. So hopefully that makes sense. And then reason number 3, I talked about this previously as well, but gaining nutrition knowledge that will set you up to maintain your results long term. So tracking macros, and not necessarily macros specifically, which I'm going to talk about in a second, because there's different tiers to tracking, right? There's different tiers to tracking calories and macros. But tracking your overall food intake, right, what you're consuming on a daily basis, teaches you which foods contain which macronutrients, how those foods are affecting you personally, whether that's related to how you're personally digesting those foods, if they're making you feel full or not, if they're satiating you, if they're affecting your energy levels in different ways, right? Everybody's different. Everybody, has different foods. There might be some foods that you might be sensitive to, right? You might have some intolerances to. So tracking these foods, it's not just about the fat loss, but it's about educating you on how these foods make you feel, right? And then also, like I said, what macros make up certain foods. And then also, what an actual portion size looks like, right? Because I mentioned a little while ago, portion sizes are typically a lot bigger nowadays, especially for eating out at restaurants and things like that. And when you're tracking your calories, when you're tracking your macros and your calories, and you're seeing, what an actual 4 ounces of chicken looks like, or what an actual tablespoon of peanut butter is. And if you've never tracked a tablespoon of peanut butter, you're going to be really, really disappointed when you do, because it's disappointing. But anyway, if you've never done that before, then you'll never actually see, what a portion size for these different things look like. And then also, right, when you're tracking these things, you're building that knowledge up. You're building that the skill of being able to decipher between these different portion sizes and these different amounts that you're consuming. And that is super powerful over the long term. So again, tracking macros, it shouldn't be looked at as a diet, and it really shouldn't be looked at as restrictive or obsessive. It literally is just a tool that teaches you what's in the food that you eat, so you can feel empowered in each and every food decision that you make moving forward. So those are just a few of the reasons why, I think tracking macros is important, especially when you have specific goals that are related to fat loss, even muscle building. It's important in all different aspects of that. And when I say tracking macros, again, there are many different tiers when it comes to tracking, and sometimes being too restrictive and too structured can actually cause worse results for certain people. And it can actually cause people to not be as compliant as they could be, or not be as adherent to their plan as they could be if they actually were a little bit less structured in their tracking. So let's go over, a few of the tracking tiers that I kind of work through with my personal clients, based off of, mostly experience and then what their specific goals are. So these tiers go from the most basic to more advanced. So I'm going to kind of just go down the line here and give you an idea of the different tiers that come with tracking. So the first one would be, using a food journal or also food pictures. So this is probably the most basic tier, just writing down what you're eating. You're not necessarily using like a tracking app or anything like that. You're just writing down your food. So you're becoming aware of what you're consuming, and you can kind of look back on that, as you go. Another kind of, even with this tier, would be food pictures. So you're just literally snapping pictures of your food as like right before you eat it. So you kind of have a food picture journal to look back on. So rather than writing everything down, you kind of have pictures to look back on to gauge, your portion sizes, all of that. So that's a great way to kind of start off if you're completely new to tracking. The second one would be the handful diet guidelines. So I'm sure you've heard of this before. If you haven't, I'm going to go through a few of the guidelines just so you have an idea. But these are basically using your hands to gauge portion sizes and to gauge different macronutrient portion sizes. So for example, if we're looking at protein, about a palm size, and this is very, very rough, right? This is a very rough estimate, and it's going to depend on obviously the person, because if you have a petite woman versus a very large man, their palm sizes are going to be completely different. But that might in itself line up with the amount that they personally need, actually. So these kind of, the way that I'm going to go through these, it's going to be a rough estimate. But for protein, for a palm-sized portion of protein, it's roughly between 20 to 40 grams of protein. Again, depending on the size of your hand, could even be from 20 to 50 grams of protein. But that's just kind of a gauge for that. With carbs, one of the guidelines is a cupped hand-sized portion of carbs, which is roughly, again, around 20 to 40 grams of carbs, depending on how big your hand is. With fat, the guideline is about a thumb-sized portion is roughly 7 to 15 grams of fat. And then with veggies, a fist-sized portion of veggies is roughly 10 to 20, maybe 30 grams of carbs. Realize that, these are big ranges, right, in terms of the rough estimates. But again, this is a good starting point. If you are completely new to tracking and you are looking to just, quote unquote, get your feet wet. So this is a good option I don't typically use handful diet guidelines with my clients because just the technology that we have nowadays and the ease of tracking with these different apps, I feel like for most people, they can kind of just go right into using the app. And even if they've never tracked macros before or never tracked calories before, they catch on pretty quickly. It's a learning process, right? Just like anything else. There is a learning curve to tracking. And I think that could be one of the reasons why some people tend to not want to start doing it, because it does, like if you've ever started like for your first time tracking calories or macros, it can be super frustrating, especially if you are like me, technologically challenged. So it can be frustrating, but what I tell my clients all the time is that just like anything else, it's a learning curve. And after like a week, maybe 2 weeks, you will feel like a pro. It just takes a little bit of repetition to really get it down. So that's typically what I recommend is I kind of stay away from those first two unless it's someone who absolutely doesn't want to use technology, but typically just going right into tracking can be beneficial over the long term. So that would be the third kind of tier, would be tracking only calories, right? So we talk about tracking macros and calories. Tracking macros is referring to protein, fat, and carbs. Tracking only calories is referring to basically just paying attention to your calorie intake, like not really having any goals when it comes to splitting up your protein, fat, and carbs, right? You're just tracking overall calories. And this can be good for someone who's completely new to using a tracking app and just trying to learn that skill. But generally for me, like I'm not necessarily a fan of just tracking calories, because most people often neglect protein when it comes to just tracking calories. And then sometimes it can also lead to a mindset where you're kind of like, oh, well, if it fits within my calories, then it's fine. And this can lead people to make poor food decisions, poor food quality choices, and kind of go down that rabbit hole, which is obviously we don't necessarily want that. So proper education on food choices would be the key to success if you were only tracking calories or you just wanted to track calories, because again, you can get into that mindset of it fits my calories, so I'm just gonna eat this packaged food all the time, which if you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure you're not in that camp, but for some people that's what happens, right? So tracking calories would be the next tier of tracking. And again, I'm not a huge fan of that because one, it can get you in that mindset of, if it fits my calories. And two, the main reason for me is, one of the important reasons for me personally is because you're neglecting protein. You're not really paying attention to your protein intake, which we know is super, super important for any body composition or fat loss changes. It's not just about calories. Calories are, the most important. You have to be in a caloric deficit to lose body fat. But if you're not paying attention to your protein intake, you're going to just be missing out on a huge piece of the puzzle, which we don't want, right? So let me take a sip of water here. The next tier would be tracking calories and protein. So I really like this approach, and I use this approach a lot with my clients. The reason is because it allows for more freedom while still kind of checking the primary boxes when it comes to optimizing fat loss and optimizing body composition changes, right? Because we don't just want to lose weight. We want to lose body fat and we want to optimize our body composition. So with those primary boxes that I just mentioned, the two primary boxes when it comes to fat loss, right? Optimizing fat loss and, optimizing your body composition changes. The first one is your calorie intake in alignment with your deficit goal. Like I mentioned, you have to be in a caloric deficit to lose body fat. So that would be the first box. So you're obviously tracking your calories. And the second primary box would be, are you consuming adequate protein to maintain your muscle mass and to also, stay full and stay satisfied, right? We know protein is the most satiating nutrient, and it also has the highest thermic effect of food. And it also has so many other important functions in the body. And there's so many other reasons why, having adequate protein is essential. So number 4 is tracking protein and calories, and then kind of letting carbs and fats fall where they may within your calorie goal. And again, this is a method that I use a lot with my clients, and it's very, very successful, especially for clients who maybe are just getting into tracking, or they might not have any specific goals when it comes to their carbs and fat intake. They're really just looking to, maybe fat loss is their main goal, and they're looking to make it as simple as possible while still, getting great results. So tracking calories and protein is a really good approach there. I sometimes do that myself as well. Especially when I'm doing, like when I have diet breaks or when I'm at maintenance intake, if I just want to pay attention, or if I'm traveling, really, like if I'm traveling, if I have a diet break, if I'm kind of, eating out at restaurants a little bit more, and I don't necessarily want to get like super, kind of neurotic about my carb and fat intake, I will just go to tracking calories and protein. And obviously I'll be estimating that a little bit if I'm eating out at restaurants and stuff like that, but it makes it a lot less stressful. And it kind of it gives you a lot more freedom in that sense, while still being able to hit your goals and to stay within the goals that you have. So that would be one of the primary ways that I use tracking with my clients, is tracking calories and protein. The next way, or the next tier, we have 2 tiers left in terms of basic to more advanced. The next tier is pretty similar to the last one, but it would be tracking calories and protein and hitting a minimum daily fat goal. So you'd be tracking your calories and your protein, right? You'd have a set caloric intake, you'd have a set protein goal. And I usually set protein goal as like a minimum, right? So I say, hit this minimum threshold for protein. If you want to go above that, by all means, go crazy. But we have a minimum protein intake, and then also have a minimum daily fat intake. And this, you'll do this, and then you'll kind of fill the rest of your calories with fats and carbs as you choose. And I typically use this approach if I notice with certain clients that fat intake is getting too low for too long. Obviously, this is not typically a concern for someone who is like on a lower carb or a keto diet, obviously, because their carbs will already be low, so their fat will inadvertently be higher. So it's not typically a concern for those folks, but for anybody who's following more of like a moderate or a higher carb approach, or maybe cycling through like a high carb approach or whatever it is, for a longer period of time, then it's beneficial to make sure that fat is hitting a certain threshold in terms of body size. So I chatted about minimum daily fat intake on last week's episode and why, and I actually got a question, this exact question. Someone said, what is the minimum daily fat intake that you recommend? So I dove into that answer on last week's episode, which is episode 119. I'll link that in the show notes so you can check it out. I don't want to go too far into that now since I just chatted about it last week. But that would be the fifth kind of tier of tracking, is tracking calories and protein, and then also tracking and hitting a minimum daily fat intake. So you're tracking calories, you have a minimum protein goal, and then you have a minimum fat goal for the day. And then you basically fill in the rest of your calories with fats and carbs depending on, or to work up to that calorie goal that you have. So that would be number 5. And then number 6, which I would say is the most advanced way of tracking macros. And this is typically what a lot of people, if you're listening to this, if you've been in the nutrition space for a while, if you've been interested in nutrition for a while, if you've been tracking for a while, tracking all macros, right? And having specific targets within your protein, fat, and carb goals. So I typically use this approach with clients who are more advanced with tracking, and if we're trying to maybe dial in specific things. So maybe we're trying to increase their carb intake to optimize their training and their recovery, or maybe deal with some hormonal issues. We're obviously going to want to be tracking their carbs, their fats, and their protein. Or if they're in a keto or a low carb phase, tracking carbs to kind of stay under a certain threshold. That would be a time where you track carbs, protein, and fat. And then there's other reasons as well. Those are just kind of the 2 main ones that I deal with specifically with my clients. And, wow, I'm talking really fast today. I'm just excited about this question because I get it a lot, and I'm excited. I'm just excited to dive into this. So, getting back to the number 6, which was tracking all macros and having specific targets. So even with this approach of tracking all macros, right, tracking protein, carbs, and fat, I still generally give ranges to hit within those specific macros, right? Rather than just giving one static number. Or I'll give like a static number if I say, hey, hit your protein goal of 145 grams, your fat goal of 70 grams, and carbs 100 grams, right? If I give you a static number, I still always give a range within those static numbers, right? Because like, for example, if it's, stay within 10 grams of your protein and carb goal, and then maybe like stay within 5 grams of your fat goal, right? So in either direction, right? So if I gave you a goal of 145 grams of protein, then within a 10 gram range would be 135 to 155, right? So that's generally what I do, because I found that helps a lot with compliance and feeling less stress when it comes to hitting your macros perfectly, because in reality, like that's never going to happen. I mean, maybe once in a blue moon or once, every so often you'll hit your macros right on the money, but no one typically ever hits their macros exactly on the dot day in and day out. That's just not realistic. It's not realistic. And if I see one of my clients' trackers, this hasn't actually happened in the past, but it actually happened once. I lied. It happened once where the macros were literally the exact targets I gave for the entire week. That's a huge red flag, right? That's a huge red flag that stands out to me because, again, no one is ever going to be right on the money every single day with their macros, and you shouldn't be, right? That's not realistic. Unless you're maybe a bodybuilder, like in your last few weeks of your prep, then maybe you're hitting your macros like within 1 or 2 grams. But typically, it's just not realistic. So that would be the last and the most advanced tier. I'll kind of go through these 6 tiers again, just to review. So the tiers from basic to most advanced when it comes to tracking. The first one would be tracking with just using a food journal or food pictures. The second would be the handful diet guidelines. Sorry. The third would be tracking only calories. And then getting into the methods that I personally use with my clients, and the ones that I like would be tracking calories and protein as number 4. Number 5, tracking calories and protein and hitting a minimum daily fat goal, then filling the rest of your calories with fats and carbs. And then the last and most advanced would be tracking all your macros and having specific targets within those macros and calories themselves. Obviously, the macros will add up to your calorie allotment. So those would be the kind of basic to advanced tiers. You could also even go further into this if you are someone who is having some health issues in the sense of maybe you're deficient in certain vitamins and minerals and things like that. Tracking the foods that you're consuming and seeing what those foods contain in terms of those vitamins and minerals. Chronometer is a great app for that, and that is probably even the more advanced for tracking. So you're actually going and tracking micronutrients, not just macronutrients. That does take a little bit more effort, and for people who are more advanced, I've done that myself in the past. I don't think that it's, unless you're using an app like Chronometer, I don't think that it's very sustainable or necessary. But for some people, it might be, right, especially for a period of their life if they're trying to offset some deficiencies or anything like that. So those would be the tiers for tracking macros. And, with all that being said, to answer the original question, do you need to track to lose weight? My answer, my kind of strict answer with this would be no, you don't need to track to lose weight. But tracking is an absolutely great tool to, like I said, build structure, awareness, and nutritional knowledge to reach your goals faster, learn how to maintain your results long-term, and all the other benefits that I just laid out for you in terms of everything else I just talked about. So awareness, freedom, having more structure, just building up that skill of tracking so that you can, move forward past your dieting, right? Past your diet phase, past your fat loss phase. Once you've lost that body fat, once you've gotten to your goal, okay, where do you go now, right? You don't want to go back to what you're doing before. You want to have that knowledge that you've built over this period to be able to move that into your maintenance phase and be able to sustain your results long term. And having that, tracking knowledge and that skill within all of that is super beneficial and super important for being able to maintain your results in the long term. So my strict answer would be, again, do you need to track macros or do you need to track in general to lose weight? No, you don't need to, but if you want to get to your goals efficiently and be able to maintain them over the long term, then my answer would be you probably should. So now that I'm losing my voice, I'm going to end it there. I know I kind of sped through a lot of that. I just get really excited about this question because it's a question I get a lot, and I'm glad that someone asked it in my Q&A box so that I could dive into it a little bit deeper. But yes, that's all we have for today. And as always, if you're enjoying the show, please share it out to anybody that you think would be interested. And again, I have lots of exciting stuff coming in the future or the near future for MetFlex Life and for MetFlex and Chill in general. We have a lot of new guests coming on, a few repeat guests actually as well to dive into some other topics. So super excited for that. And I will keep you posted on all that in the near future. All right, I'll talk to you next time.